Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It's time once again for my weekly chatty catch up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as some general lifey chit chat and catch up on my week. And the reading week was a little bit out the window, mainly because I had picked up in the past, a couple weeks ago, 2 separate books, but both small and both on the same topic in nonfiction, intending to do sort of a reading vlog by accident. But this week I discovered I couldn't renew one of them because it was a new release with holds on it. And so I threw everything out the window and decided to just dive into those. So we have 2 nonfiction books on food this week. The first is Gather, Black Food, Nourishment, and the Art of Togetherness by Ashanté and Reese. And I really enjoyed this. I found it very informative. It's only about 100 pages and is from Norton Shorts, which I had not heard of before, but I need to look into what they're publishing because this was just great. Very easy and consumable while having a lot of information. So I loved that this was broken down into 4 sections: gardens, reunions, repasts, and mutual aid. And this is focused on the topic of food security, specifically in the Black community in the US. And each of those feels like it has thematic through lines, obviously on food security, but is tackling each topic very, very differently. So Gardens starts with exposing me to some real new information about especially the effects of the Black Lives Matter movement in the US a few years ago, now almost 10 years ago, having sort of set off a real boost in food security activity. And that was something I was not aware of, even being fairly aware of the direct impacts. This is a real indirect impact. But we are talking in that section about the ways that communities came together. Churches really got involved in things like using their urban land to incorporate community gardens and the power that can have on connecting people, having or hosting farmers markets on their property in the church or in the parking lot if they have parking, and welcoming specifically Black farmers so that you have this reciprocity between the community. And I found that really incredible and not something I have ever heard about before, this boom in that sort of movement. Though I'm aware of all of those factors, like even just talking about food security and the access that those kind of urban areas have to fresh produce, I think that this did a great job of providing that level of explanation of sort of the basics of food deserts while also bringing in what's being done in direct action. And I really liked that. And then we move into sort of the aspect that the next 2 sections have a real duality, or I think all of this has a real duality, even just the title, Gather. The words mean multiple things. So when we talk about gathering, we can talk about literally harvesting food, or we can talk about gathering together as people. And coming together to nourish, we can literally nourish ourselves for our survival, or we can nourish our spirits, and the coming together of community doing that, nourishing us in that way. And so food and feasting has that dual meaning. And so there's a lot of that coming up. In reunions, there was this really great tie together between the importance of literal family reunions and those sort of big get-togethers that you have periodically, and the way that that's valued for specifically Black families, tying back to the idea of reunion as reuniting, and the way post-abolition people were literally having to put out ads to reunite with lost family that had been separated by slavery. And wow, was that a powerful, impactful connection to make between the dual meanings of reunion and reuniting. And next, the repasts is funeral feasts, more or less, and the ways those are a celebration and the importance of nourishing ourselves that way, both from the food perspective and maintaining life, while also nourishing our spirits coming together, much to what I said before, where people are coming together for mutual support and caring in that moment. But the author ties it back again to heritage and the African practice and traditions of having a live animal who is there sacrificed for the feast, and that being very honored and somewhat ritualized. And so feasts in that way often become about and focused on honoring the cycle of life and death. And so those 2 things being tied together really was very, very powerful and impactful. And then of course, mutual aid really encapsulates all of this about different organizations that are arising and being able to make real impacts in the types of ways that I talked about, where it's not necessarily big bombastic things. It's not world changing, but it's community changing. And it all starts at the community level of people being very directly engaged and connecting with each other, rather than trying to necessarily purchase from one another. Some people putting forward money that they have that they can give up, while other people don't have money, but they can provide, transportation, or they can provide direct food resources that they've grown in their garden. And so everybody contributing what they are able, rather than it being quite as transactional. And I think that was a really powerful end cap to this whole book. So I would very strongly recommend this. I really, really enjoyed it and thought it was fantastic. Very concise and well-presented information for sure. My second food book is Bite by Bite by Aimee Nezhukumatathil, and it's criminal that they don't have the illustrator on the cover, but it's Fumi Nakamura, and you could see some of Fumi's beautiful artwork here. Here's one of figs. This one's my favorite. Beautiful, but just beautiful little essays that are each topically a food item. Most of these are produce, so like fruits or vegetables, whole food items, but there are a couple of dishes like lumpia in there. And the essays are really interesting because they have a very personal essay vibe, but also incorporate some amount of history and botanical facts and description of the food. The very first one is rambutan. And so Aimee is talking through the way it comes from the root for hair. And of course, that leads to a big story about her poofy 80s teenage hair, more or less, and foibles surrounding that. It's very funny and witty, but also some facts about the actual food item and her memory of that food item, separate from her poofy hair. So I found this to be very akin to something like the Around the World in 80 blank series of books, like Around the World in 80 Plants, Around the World in 80 Trees, which I enjoy very much. That is much more fact-based, while this one is very much centering her personal experience. But that's just sort of a thing that I really enjoy. That's a type of book that I really, really like. And this was doing exactly that and doing it really well. So I appreciated this so much. It was just a delight to read. It's, again, quite a short book. I think this one's under 200 pages or just about. Yeah, right under 200. And so it's a quick, bite-sized read. Then the last book that I finished this week is Dead Water by C.A. Fletcher. This is the author of A Boy and His Dog at the End of the World, which I loved. Fantastic post-apocalyptic novel. This one is a horror and it's contemporary, and it's very long and chunky. I really enjoyed it, but with some caveats, and mainly saying that I think I enjoyed it where a lot of other people will not. And I feel like I've been saying that a lot lately, but this is very true in this case because it is very long. It's very slow paced. There's a lot of tension and discord through it, but because of the slow pace, there's not a lot of ramp up on the way through the story. It also has a billion perspectives. But why I think that works is that we're set on the Outer Hebrides in this story, and very rural, remote island setting. And the island feels like what's the central unifying story element, rather than having a single or a few perspectives to be from. We do have some characters that we keep returning to, and I liked that, but I also liked the head hopping of jumping through a bajillion characters, and I think we were 400 pages in and got a new perspective. And it feels like the attempt there is to give us the whole island, basically. Give us what everyone in the community is going through by jumping. Some things we are only in a person's head for one chapter, and that's it, and then we just move on. Others we return to over and over and kind of get more of their story in depth about them, and it feels like all of the characters are really distinct, even the ones that we're in very briefly. I love that. We also get some sections that are just purely nature. I thought that was really cool and draws back to what I was saying about the island feeling like it's the central unifying element. But what this is we're separated into a few parts. I think it was either 4 or 5. But at the beginning of each part, we get sort of a piece of a mythic story about this Viking, it seems, in the past who went around and there was wells being poisoned by bodies thrown in them. So water is a huge element of this. And water is present everywhere because we're on the island, and one of the characters we follow is a free diver, and so we're very centrally following that. We have a lot of people who make their livelihoods on boats. There's a fishery around. There's water all over. But what starts kicking off at the beginning is the fact that maybe treasure hunters come to the island and are looking for something at a historic site, and something goes wrong there. It seems like they do find something, and that comes into the hands of one of our sort of primary characters. And that's when things start getting unsettling. But there's not a lot of like violence or gore. This does ramp up into proper horror, but it takes a really long time. And for so long, we're exploring this island and feeling unsettled. We get into kind of horror tropes of there being something paranormal going on, and it resulting in everyone being just in a heightened, abrasive state, where they're not outright violent or anything, but just everyone seems on edge and is really picking fights with each other, that kind of thing. And so that's going on. And then we start to get some weird like Final Destination logic. And what I mean by that, so Final Destination is a franchise of films where people escape death, and then death is just always coming for them. And the deaths are kind of ridiculous in that they basically are a Rube Goldberg machine of unconnected things that string together to get them, more or less. And that sort of happens here, but not in the way of deaths, just things that are unrelated that string together in a ridiculous, unbelievable way in order to make things happen. And so that occurred multiple times, and I was kind of like I grew up with Final Destination, so I'm willing to accept this, more or less, but it did feel a little absurd to me. But there is, something sort of paranormally going on, so you can buy that it's the paranormal force is making these random things string together, and people make mistakes they wouldn't normally, and stuff like that. But as I said, I was willing to overlook that. I think that might bother people more if they sort of don't have that background of accepting it in Final Destination or similar. So I don't want to say what this is, though the typical type of book this is, the horror element, I think you would hear about it going into a book normally, but I don't want to because it's something fairly fresh that I haven't really seen done before. And that surprised me, I think, the way that it's done. I can put it in a comment if you're really curious and don't care about being spoiled for that. But I think that I enjoyed the horror aspect. I enjoyed the connection with the island that all of the people seem to have. I think that we got a really varied story by doing it in the way that the author did. So that felt very, very cool. And yeah, it just was compelling. I could not put this down. Every time I would sit down and read it, even though there's not a lot of action, there's very little action in here, I was sitting down and reading like 100 pages at a time, just in a go, and I rarely do that. So it was really, really readable. I think also one highlight that I would point out to this is there was great, totally unexpected disability representation. We had a huge number of characters that were disabled. One of the characters has a leg brace, but she free dives, and so she moves like a fish in the water. We have a character that is in a wheelchair. They have real backstories that connect them with that experience. We have someone who has a family with hereditary hearing loss, and that comes into play very significantly, especially with sign language. Like, very, very broad range of different types of disability, and yet it didn't feel at all like it was shoved in any way. It felt very natural and true to the characters in the story, and I very much liked that. I thought that was fantastic. So this was a hit for me, but because it is so slow and has so many characters, I think a lot of people would struggle with it or not give them what they wanted from a horror book. So if you're looking for a very atmospheric, very nature-focused, vibey, sort of very remote island, watery, not bloody and gory type of horror, this is probably a great book to try. So with that, we are on to the books that I am reading, and I'm working on Tracks. This is a buddy read that I'm progressing with Melinda of A Web of Stories and Angelia of Read and Reread, and going along very well. I think we will finish in the next couple days. And Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. I said last week I really needed to progress on this, and I set it aside because I wanted to read the things that were due back. And so I really have not made progress, which is not a huge deal, but it probably means I will not finish in time for book club. Oh dear. I think I have finished every book while most other people have not. So I'm not worried about the balance there. So those are what's going on. I will finish another BookTube Prize book at the gym later on today. So that puts me at 2 remaining to start, one on audio and one in print, meaning I am well in place to finish my BookTube Prize reading in time perfectly with everything that I've been doing. So I'm very happy about that. And then I will be somewhat free to read whatever I want instead of having a significant chunk of my reading taken up by BookTube Prize reading. Even though you're not hearing about it, it is taking up a lot of my time. So that is it for book updates. In watching updates, I had a really varied watching week. So let's begin with a film. I watched a documentary called Tramps. This is all about the New Romantics movement in England, and it was something like I very tangentially am aware of, but I was not aware of most of these actual people who are famous artists and performers from that time. And it was really cool. I just really enjoyed it. It is a very heightened time of expression and being really radical in your art and performance and the way you dress. Just very like whole person as a performance is really prominent to that. It's kind of long, but I enjoyed it a lot. The next one was Kristin Key's stand-up comedy act, Lesbian Army. Again, I enjoyed this. I laughed so much. I don't think I have seen any of her specials before this, but I have seen some clips and jokes before, I'm pretty sure. And she comes across very Canadian, yet is not at all. And she talks about growing up in Texas, very evangelical and closeted gay. So that really connected back to my having just read Phlox, which is kind of the same story. And so very relatable here and really funny, just hilariously funny. So I enjoyed that one very much. And lastly, that I watched was Welcome to Wrexham season 5, the latest season I completed. And I have loved this whole show. I am pretty much the person from IT Crowd that's like, did you see that ludicrous display last night? I don't do sports very much at all or follow any sport. So they have made the sports details and mechanics, as well as the league structure mechanics for football/soccer, very accessible, I think, to someone who is not a sporty person. So I think that's not what the show is about, though. It centers on a soccer team that Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds have bought and are supporting, but it's really about community and this whole entire community surrounding this team. So we don't just get the story of the fans, though. It's not just about the fandom. We're connecting with people who are going through struggles in the community, especially at the beginning. This was a very impoverished community, and literally them raising this team up and really investing in the community there has brought the community a renewed life, more or less. They have told stories of people who are struggling for one reason or another and made connections for people to get business investments. They've helped team members who are no longer on the team have a path forward through their retirement from the sport into other avenues. They've done a lot to connect people and make sure the well-being of this community is focused on and supported. And so I have loved that. Every aspect of that is great about this show. Yeah. And this season in particular, I think they shifted focus even more to that. So that has been great to see. So I think that's all I did this week. Really, I didn't feel like reading very much. I read okay, but I really was not feeling like spending a ton of time reading, so I didn't. I watched a lot of Love Island, though I didn't finish any seasons because their seasons are so long. I watched a lot of YouTube, so I did catch up on a lot of BookTube videos. But yeah, just not a lot to talk about this week or exciting this week because I didn't feel up to doing very much. I'm still kind of in a funk after foster cat concerns the past couple weeks. So I think last week we were still a bit in the woods, but coming out of the woods as far as Isabella, my foster cat's health, Yelly Isabelli. She is doing better and okay. However, it's not great. So she is out of the woods as far as like major health concerns, but she came back to me from the shelter for a couple days. She was there because she was really, really in critical health. And then very quickly ended up showing signs of a respiratory infection or a URI, which is for adult cats that are healthy, pretty much just a cold, a bad cold. And that's very typical that they are always going around at shelters. So not too surprising she spent a couple days there and came back with one, but she's on an immunosuppressant as well because of all of the major issues she was going through and for her digestion as well. And so her digestive issues almost totally cleared up and seemed to be because of that immunosuppressant. And then she gets this horrible cold and she doesn't have an immune system to fight it because she's on an immunosuppressant. So it's just like, we cannot win. And so we stepped down the dose on the immunosuppressant. And today she is finally looking like she's really getting over her respiratory infection, but her digestive issues are back. So we cannot win. And she's still in relatively good health. The digestive issues themselves were not the critical thing. She had been dealing with that, unfortunately, for a very, very long time. But it means we just still have not gotten through it. But we are, now that she's getting over the cold, hopefully we can ramp things back up and have her be okay. So it just is a constant back and forth. So that has been very taxing to me and very mentally and emotionally taxing. I think other than that, really, it's just the weather has been crazy here. I didn't really go out and do anything for Independence Day. Even if I had wanted to, most places were having to massively postpone things because it was either so hot or we had storms that started around the time that fireworks would be starting. So storms kicked in and it was just terrible for anyone who was out. So I didn't bother. Not that I terribly wanted to, but yeah, and that has continued pretty much all week. It's been very hot and humid. We had a couple little cool downs. This week is actually slightly cooler than the previous week, but it's been so stormy, the humidity is really ramping everything up. So we've had massive storms the past 2 days, and I don't know if you can tell that the light has been kind of coming and going today, despite the fact that rain was supposed to be done for today. When I started filming, it's still kind of back and forth. So very unpredictable and chaotic weather, which has made it hard to do anything, and not that I've wanted to. So I think that is all for my week this week. It's been chaos, a quiet chaos, because I've been mostly staying at home. But I think I have one recommendation for this week, and that is kind of it's one I meant to recommend and forgot, so it's a little older, it's about a month old, but I wanted to bring it up because it is very delightful and brought a bright spot to my life when I saw it. And it is just a short tour of the House of Lords Library by Jay Draper, a history channel. So this is talking through the history of it, and it is just a beautiful space. Like, this is a dream library. So definitely, if you like a gorgeous library and need some book eye candy, go check out that video. So I will link it down below in the description box. So I think that's all for my week this week. With that, I will say I hope you have a wonderful week in reading and in life, and thank you so very much for watching.